Michael Taylor Jr. rubbed his tired eyes as he settled into his first-class seat on Flight 207 from Atlanta to San Francisco. The 19-year-old college sophomore had just spent a week with his family celebrating his dad's birthday. His father, Michael Taylor Sr., ran a big tech company called Future Tech Solutions, but Michael Jr. never bragged about it. He dressed simply in jeans and a plain blue hoodie, carrying just a backpack with his laptop and a few books. Back to college life, he thought, looking out the window as other passengers filed onto the plane. He was studying computer science at a top university in California and had big dreams of creating apps that would help people in need. The plane took off smoothly. About half an hour into the flight, Michael felt cold from the air conditioning blasting above his seat. He pressed the call button for assistance. A flight attendant named Diane Wilson came over. She had been working for the airline for 15 years and usually took pride in her customer service skills. "Could I please get a blanket?" Michael asked politely with a smile. "Sure. I'll bring one shortly," Diane replied, but she seemed rushed and stressed. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Michael saw Diane helping other passengers, mostly older white travelers, in the first-class cabin. She brought them drinks, snacks, and even blankets, but kept passing his row without acknowledgement. Michael wasn't the type to make a fuss, but after 30 minutes of shivering, he pressed the call button once more. Just as he did, another passenger accidentally knocked over a cup of coffee. Diane rushed over to clean up the spill, looking increasingly frustrated. 5 more minutes passed before Diane finally approached Michael's seat, her face tight with annoyance. "Yes?" she asked sharply, not making eye contact. "I'm sorry to bother you again, but I was wondering if I could still get that blanket." Michael's voice remained respectful, just above a whisper to avoid disturbing others. Something in Diane seemed to snap. Her face flushed red. "I already told you I'd get to it when I can," she shouted, loud enough that passengers several rows away turned to stare. Michael was shocked by her tone but kept his composure. "I understand you're busy. I've just been waiting for a while and thought my request might have been forgotten." "Forgotten? You think I don't know how to do my job?" Diane's voice grew even louder. "That's not what I meant at all," Michael said, raising his hand slightly in a calming gesture. What happened next stunned everyone watching. Without warning, Diane's hand flew through the air and slapped Michael across his face. The sharp sound echoed through the suddenly silent cabin. Michael's cheek stung from the impact. He touched his face in disbelief, too shocked to speak. Around him, passengers gasped. A woman across the aisle covered her mouth in horror. An older man in a business suit stood up in protest. "Did you see that?" someone whispered loudly. "She just hit that young man," another passenger exclaimed. A woman sitting nearby had been recording a video message for her kids when the incident happened. She had captured everything on her phone. Michael, still holding his reddened cheek, finally found his voice. "Why would you do that?" he asked quietly, his eyes wide with confusion and hurt. Diane seemed to realize what she had done. Her angry expression flickered, replaced briefly by shock at her own actions. But instead of apologizing, she straightened her uniform and said coldly, "You need to calm down and stop causing a disturbance." "I didn't do anything wrong," Michael replied, his voice steady despite the trembling he felt inside. "I just asked for a blanket." Other passengers began speaking up in Michael's defense. "That was completely uncalled for," said a woman sitting across the aisle. "You can't just hit someone for asking for a blanket," an elderly man added firmly. A teenage girl who recognized Michael from social media posts about his father's company whispered to her mother, "That's Michael Taylor's son. His dad runs that big tech company." 3 other flight attendants rushed over, forming a protective circle around Diane rather than checking on Michael. "What's going on here?" asked the lead flight attendant, a tall man named Robert. "This passenger is being disruptive," Diane claimed, not meeting anyone's eyes. "That's not true," called out several voices at once. "She slapped him for no reason," added the woman with the phone. "I got it all on video." Robert looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, recording crew members is against airline policy. So is assaulting." Passengers, the woman replied firmly. Michael, always level-headed like his father, took a deep breath. I'd like your names and employee numbers, please, and I'd like to file a formal complaint about what just happened. Instead of providing the requested information, Robert said, Sir, please remain calm. We'll handle this internally. There's no need to escalate the situation. Michael nodded slowly, realizing they weren't going to take his complaint seriously. He reached for his phone and sent a quick text to his father. Dad, something serious just happened on my flight. A flight attendant slapped me when I asked for a blanket. They're refusing to give me their names or file a report. Flight 207 to San Francisco. Michael didn't know it yet, but that one text message was about to change everything. Not just for him, but for the entire flight crew and airline. The cabin went completely quiet after Diane slapped Michael. You could have heard a pin drop. Several passengers stared with their mouths open. The shock of what happened hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Michael sat frozen, his hand still touching his cheek, which was now turning red. The sting from the slap wasn't just physical. The humiliation burned even deeper. He had never been hit by anyone before, let alone a stranger, and certainly not for something as simple as asking for a blanket. Did that really just happen? A gray-haired woman whispered to her husband. The woman with the phone, her name was Patricia, leaned across the aisle toward Michael. I got that all on video, she said quietly. That was completely unacceptable behavior. Michael nodded, grateful for her support, but still too shocked to speak properly. Around him, the first-class cabin was coming alive with whispers and concerned looks. Someone should report this, said a businessman in a navy suit standing up from his seat. You can't treat passengers that way no matter how stressed you might be. Within minutes, the commotion caught the attention of the other flight attendants. 3 of them rushed over. Robert, the lead attendant with salt and pepper hair, Anita, a middle-aged woman with a tight ponytail, and Thomas, a younger man who looked like he might be new to the job. Instead of checking on Michael, they gathered around Diane, creating a wall between her and the other passengers. They spoke in hushed voices, occasionally glancing back at Michael with expressions that ranged from suspicious to concerned. Meanwhile, Patricia was showing her video to nearby passengers who shook their heads in disbelief. I need to call the captain, Robert finally said, picking up the cabin phone. While the crew huddled, several passengers came over to check on Michael. Are you okay, young man? Asked an elderly gentleman who introduced himself as Dr. Chen. I'm a retired physician. That was quite a blow you received. I think I'm all right, Michael said softly, the shock beginning to wear off and embarrassment taking its place. Just surprised more than anything. Well, you handled yourself with remarkable poise, Dr. Chen said, patting Michael's shoulder. Many people would have reacted very differently. After a few minutes of discussion, Robert stepped forward to address the increasingly upset passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced loudly, we ask for your patience. There's been a misunderstanding between our crew member and this passenger. We're handling the situation. Misunderstanding? Patricia repeated incredulously. Your flight attendant assaulted this young man. We all saw it happen. Several passengers voiced their agreement. Robert raised his hands for calm. Please return to your seats. We need to maintain order on this aircraft. Anita approached Michael with a glass of water and a cold towel. Here, she said, avoiding eye contact. For your face. Thank you, Michael replied, taking the items. But this doesn't address what happened. I'd like to file a formal complaint and get the names of everyone involved. Anita seemed uncomfortable. We'll handle this through proper channels when we land. That's not good enough, Michael insisted, his voice gaining strength. At the very least, I deserve an apology. Listen, Thomas said, stepping closer and lowering his voice. We understand you're upset, but making a big scene won't help anyone. Just stay calm for the rest of the flight and we'll sort everything out in San Francisco. Michael looked around at the flight attendants' faces and realized they were closing ranks. They weren't going to acknowledge what Diane had done. They were hoping to sweep it under the rug. I need to use the restroom, Michael said, standing up. Once inside the tiny bathroom, Michael pulled out his phone. He knew there was no signal at 35,000 feet, but he could still send a text that would go through once they landed. His dad had always taught him to document everything in difficult situations. He quickly typed out what happened, being careful to stick to the facts. Then he added a photo of his face, which still showed a faint red mark in the shape of a hand. "Send when possible," he whispered, pressing the button. Back in his seat, Michael noticed the atmosphere in the cabin had changed. Some passengers were openly glaring at the flight attendants. Others were typing on their phones, probably documenting what they'd witnessed. Diane had disappeared to the back of the plane. "They're trying to protect her," Patricia said, leaning over. "I heard them talking. They're saying you were being difficult and she reacted instinctively. Complete nonsense." "Thanks for recording it," Michael replied. "Truth is, I just want an apology and for them to acknowledge this wasn't right." "Well, if they don't make this right," Patricia said firmly. "My husband sits on the board of a company that does millions in corporate travel with this airline, and I'm not the only one in this cabin with connections." What no one on the plane realized was that Michael's father, Michael Taylor Sr., would receive his son's message the moment the plane got within range of a cell tower. And Michael Sr. wasn't just any concerned parent. He was the CEO of Future Tech Solutions, one of the most powerful technology companies in the country, with connections throughout the business world. The airline was about to learn a tough lesson about customer service and accountability, all because one flight attendant couldn't be bothered to bring a young man a blanket. As the plane began its descent into San Francisco, the sky outside turned golden orange with the setting sun. In the first-class cabin, things had settled into an uneasy calm. Michael kept to himself, occasionally touching his cheek, which no longer showed the red mark but still felt tender. The flight attendants had been avoiding his section as much as possible. Diane hadn't reappeared at all. The other crew members served drinks and snacks to everyone else but only gave Michael quick, nervous glances as they passed by. Patricia, the woman with the video, had moved to the empty seat beside Michael after getting permission from another flight attendant. "I've sent the video to my cloud storage," she told him quietly. "They can't make me delete it now even if they wanted to." "Thank you," Michael said sincerely. "I just want there to be some accountability." The plane dipped lower, passing through a layer of clouds. The captain's voice came over the speakers announcing they would be landing in about 20 minutes. Passengers began putting away their belongings and preparing for arrival. Robert, the lead flight attendant, walked through the cabin, checking that everyone was buckled in. When he reached Michael's row, he paused. "We'll be landing soon," he said, in a professional tone that revealed nothing of the earlier tension. "Is there anything you need before we begin our final descent?" Michael looked him in the eye. "Just some acknowledgement that what happened earlier was wrong." Robert's face tightened. "As I said, we'll address any concerns once we're on the ground. For now, please make sure your seatbelt is fastened." As he walked away, Patricia shook her head. Unbelievable. They really think they can just pretend nothing happened. What no one on the plane knew was that events had already been set in motion on the ground. Michael Taylor Sr. had received his son's text message as soon as it reached the nearest cell tower. The message had popped up on his screen during an important meeting, but one look at it had changed everything. Michael Sr. wasn't someone who used his power and connections carelessly. He had worked his way up from nothing, starting his company in a garage 20 years ago. He taught his son to be humble, to treat everyone with respect, and to stand on his own 2 feet. But seeing his son's face marked by a stranger's hand had ignited something fierce within him. With one phone call to the airline's CEO, a man he had collaborated with on several technology projects, the situation had escalated beyond the flight crew's imagination. As the plane touched down on the runway, something unusual happened. Instead of taxiing to the gate, the aircraft came to a stop on a remote part of the tarmac. The captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We'll be holding position here momentarily. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until we receive clearance to proceed to the gate." Passengers exchanged confused looks. This wasn't normal procedure. Robert picked up the cabin phone, listening intently to someone on the other end. His expression changed from confusion to concern. The other flight attendants gathered around him as he hung up, their faces growing increasingly worried as he spoke to them in hushed tones. Thomas, the youngest flight attendant, paled visibly. Anita kept shaking her head in disbelief. Diane, who had finally emerged from the back of the plane, looked like she might faint. "What's happening?" a passenger asked loudly. Robert cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the inconvenience, but we've been asked to remain in position temporarily. We'll update you as soon as we have more information." Michael noticed the flight attendants throwing nervous glances his way. His phone buzzed with a text message. It was from his dad. "Are you okay? Stay in your seat. Everything is being handled." Outside, the window's passengers could now see several vehicles approaching the aircraft. 2 security SUVs, a black town car, and what looked like an airport operations vehicle. "Looks like someone important is getting a special welcome," joked an older man by the window. But no one was laughing when the cabin door finally opened. 2 airline executives in dark suits entered first, followed by 4 airport security officers in uniform. The executives scanned the cabin until their eyes landed on Michael. One of them, a woman with short gray hair and an air of authority, approached him directly. "Mr. Taylor?" she asked quietly. "I'm Vivian Reynolds, Vice President of Customer Experience for the airline. May we speak with you for a moment?" Michael nodded, surprised by the sudden appearance of such high-ranking officials. The second executive, a tall man with kind eyes, introduced himself as the Director of Flight Operations. "We understand there was an incident on this flight," he said, his voice serious but respectful. "We'd like to see any evidence you might have." Patricia immediately spoke up. "I have video of the whole thing," she said, holding up her phone. "I'd be happy to share it with you." The executives viewed the video right there in the aisle. Their faces grew more grave with each passing second. "We'd like to speak with the flight crew now," Vivian said firmly. Turning to the passengers, she announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, we sincerely apologize for this delay. We're addressing a serious matter involving our staff. Ground crew will be boarding shortly to assist with deplaning. We thank you for your patience." The security officers approached the flight attendants, who now stood huddled together near the galley. "We need all crew members to come with us for immediate debriefing," one officer stated. "Standard procedure requires that you be temporarily relieved of duties pending investigation of a reported incident." Passengers watched in amazement as Diane, Robert, and the other flight attendants were escorted off the plane, their faces showing a mix of shock, fear, and in Diane's case, shame. As they passed Michael's seat, Diane briefly met his eyes. For the first time, she looked remorseful rather than angry. "I'm sorry," she whispered, barely audible, before being led away. Michael didn't feel any satisfaction watching them leave. He hadn't wanted anyone to lose their jobs. He had just wanted to be treated with basic respect. But as his father had always taught him, actions have consequences no matter who you are. By next morning, the story had spread like wildfire. Patricia's video had been uploaded to social media, where it quickly gathered millions of views. People couldn't stop talking about the flight attendant who slapped a passenger and then got detained along with her entire crew. At first, no one knew that the young man in the video was Michael Taylor Jr., son of one of the country's most successful tech CEOs. The video just showed a polite young man in a blue hoodie being slapped after asking for a blanket. This made the story even more powerful. It wasn't about special treatment for someone important. It was about basic human dignity. Michael woke up in his college apartment to dozens of messages from friends who had seen the video. His roommate Tom burst into his room waving his phone. "Dude, you're all over the internet. Bar's flight crew detained is trending nationwide." Michael groaned and pulled his pillow over his head. "I didn't want all this attention." "Well, you've got it now," Tom said, scrolling through his phone. "People are really on your side. Look at these comments." Against his better judgment, Michael took the phone and read some of the comments. This is how they treat passengers now. Absolutely disgusting. Props to that young man for staying so calm. I would have lost it. My sister is a flight attendant and she's horrified by this. Most airline staff would never act this way. The story was quickly picked up by major news networks. Headlines like "Passenger Slapped, Entire Flight Crew Detained" and "Airline Under Fire After Flight Attendant Assaults Passenger" flashed across TV screens nationwide. The airline's stock price dropped 4% in early morning trading. The airline's first statement tried to downplay what happened. "We are investigating an incident between a passenger and crew member on Flight 207. We take all reports seriously and are gathering facts before taking appropriate action." This vague response only made things worse. Social media exploded with angry comments from people who had experienced poor treatment on flights. Former employees began sharing stories about the airline's toxic work culture. Civil rights organizations pointed out statistics showing that young people of color often faced unfair treatment on flights. By midday, Michael's phone rang. It was his father. "You holding up okay, son?" Michael Sr. asked, his deep voice full of concern. "Yeah, Dad. Just didn't expect all this attention." Michael sighed. "I'm missing classes to avoid reporters camped outside my building." "I know this is hard," his father said. "The airline CEO called me this morning. They want to meet with us. They're in full damage control mode." "What should we do?" There was a pause on the line. "That's up to you, son. This happened to you, not me. I'll support whatever you decide." Michael thought for a moment. "I don't want to ruin anyone's life, but I also don't want this to happen to someone else." "That's my boy," his father said proudly, always thinking of others. By afternoon, someone had leaked Michael's identity to the press. Now headlines changed to "Tech CEO's son slapped by flight attendant" and "Power and Privilege. Did Taylor's connections lead to flight crew's detention?" The narrative was shifting, and not in a way Michael wanted. Some commentators were suggesting he had received special treatment because of who his father was. Others were claiming he must have done something to provoke the flight attendant. "This is ridiculous," Patricia said when she called Michael. "I was right there. You did nothing. Wrong." "People will believe what they want to believe," Michael replied, trying to sound unbothered, though it stung to have his character questioned. That evening, the airline released a new statement. "After reviewing video evidence and interviewing witnesses, we have determined that one of our flight attendants acted inappropriately toward a passenger on Flight 207. This behavior does not reflect our values or training protocols. The employee has been terminated, and additional crew members have been suspended pending further investigation. We extend our sincere apologies to the passenger involved and are taking steps to ensure such incidents never occur again." Michael's father called again. "They want us to accept a private settlement, big money but with a confidentiality agreement." "So they can bury this whole thing?" Michael asked. "That's how these things usually work," his father explained. "What do you think?" Michael took a deep breath. "I think we should hold a press conference, not to bash the airline or Diane, but to talk about respect and accountability. And I don't want their money. I want them to put it toward better training for their staff." The next morning, Michael and his father stood before a crowd of reporters outside Future Tech Solutions headquarters. Michael Sr., tall and distinguished in a simple gray suit, spoke first. "My son was mistreated on a flight yesterday. The airline has taken steps to address this specific incident, which we appreciate. But this isn't about one passenger or one flight attendant. It's about how we treat each other as human beings." Then Michael stepped up to the microphone. He wasn't wearing fancy clothes, just jeans and a clean button-down shirt. His voice was quiet but steady. "I never wanted this kind of attention. I'm just a college student who asked for a blanket on a cold plane. What happened after that has sparked a bigger conversation about respect and accountability. I don't believe the flight attendant who slapped me is a bad person. I think she was having a really bad day and made a terrible mistake. I've accepted her apology." Reporters shouted questions about lawsuits and settlements. Michael raised his hand for quiet. "I'm not interested in money. Instead, the airline has agreed to make a significant contribution toward training programs focused on de-escalation. techniques, and implicit bias awareness. They've also agreed to review their incident response protocols. A reporter called out, "Do you think you received special treatment because of who your father is?" Michael looked the reporter in the eye. "The truth is, yes, I probably did, and that's exactly the problem. Everyone deserves to be treated with basic human dignity, not just people with connections. No passenger should ever be physically assaulted, and no legitimate complaint should be dismissed. I was lucky to have a video and a father with influence. Others aren't so fortunate." As cameras flashed, Michael's simple honesty and lack of vindictiveness resonated with viewers nationwide. What could have been just another viral outrage moment was transforming into something more meaningful, a conversation about power, respect, and making things right when they go wrong. 3 months after the slapping incident, Michael sat in a bright conference room at the airline's training center. The walls were lined with photos of smiling crew members and planes soaring through clear blue skies. Outside the window, real planes taxied across the runway, gleaming in the morning sun. "Are you nervous?" his father asked, straightening his tie. Michael shook his head. "Not nervous, just hoping this actually makes a difference." Today was a big day. After weeks of discussions, planning, and negotiation, the airline was launching its new customer service and conflict resolution training program, and they had invited Michael to speak to the newest class of flight attendants. The airline's initial response had been all about damage control. But after the press conference where Michael had spoken so thoughtfully about respect and accountability, something unexpected happened. The airline's CEO, a woman named Linda Chen, reached out personally, not through lawyers or PR people. "Your son impressed me," she had told Michael Sr. during a private meeting that Michael later heard about. "Most people would have been out for blood or money. He wanted something better." What followed was a series of honest conversations about how to turn this painful incident into positive change. Michael had been skeptical at first, but when the airline committed real resources to revamping its training programs, he began to believe they were serious. Now, 3 months later, he was about to see the results firsthand. The door opened and Linda Chen herself walked in, accompanied by the airline's new director of training, a man named Paul Washington. "Michael, thank you for coming," Linda said, shaking his hand firmly. "The trainees are ready whenever you are." Michael followed them through a corridor and into a large classroom where about 40 people in crisp new uniforms sat waiting. They ranged in age from early 20s to mid-50s, a diverse group with one thing in common. They all looked nervous about meeting him. Paul introduced him simply, "This is Michael Taylor Jr. Some of you may recognize him from a video that circulated a few months ago. He's here to share his perspective with you as you begin your careers with our airline." Michael stepped up to the podium, feeling the weight of everyone's attention. He'd practiced what he wanted to say, but now he decided to speak from the heart instead. "Hi everyone, congratulations on your new jobs." He paused, looking around at their faces. "I'm going to tell you about something that happened to me on a flight. But this isn't a story about blame or punishment. It's about what we can all learn from mistakes." For the next 15 minutes, Michael described his experience, not just the slap, but how the crew had closed ranks, how his complaint had been dismissed, and how differently things might have gone for someone without his connections. "The flight attendant who slapped me, her name is Diane, made a terrible mistake in a moment of stress. We've all had bad days where we've done things we regret. The bigger problem was what happened afterward. No one stepped in to say, 'This isn't right.' No one took responsibility. The trainees listened intently, some taking notes, others nodding in understanding. I later learned that Diane had been working a double shift because another crew member called in sick. She'd been dealing with difficult passengers all day. The airline's scheduling policies didn't allow for enough rest between shifts, and there was no system in place for crew members to tag out when they were reaching their breaking point." Michael gestured to Linda Chen. "That's all changing now. The new policies include better scheduling, mental health resources, and a system where crew members can signal when they need backup without fear of being seen as weak or incompetent." A hand went up in the audience. A young woman asked, "What happened to Diane? Does she still work for the airline?" Michael looked to Linda, who stepped forward. That's a fair question. Diane was initially terminated, which was appropriate given the severity of the incident. However, after a 3-month period and completion of our new conflict resolution training, she was given the opportunity to reapply. I'm pleased to say she'll be returning next month in a ground role, with the potential to return to flight duties after a probationary period. Another trainee asked Michael, "Do you think that's fair, after what she did to you?" Michael considered this carefully. "I think people deserve second chances if they're willing to learn and grow. Diane wrote me a sincere apology letter. She's also volunteered to share her experience as part of this training program to help others avoid making the same mistake." As the Q&A continued, Michael was impressed by the thoughtful questions. These new flight attendants seemed genuinely committed to doing better. At the end of the session, Paul Washington revealed something that took Michael by surprise. "We have one more announcement today. In honor of Michael's advocacy for better training and accountability, we're establishing the Taylor Scholarship for Future Aviation Professionals. This program will provide education funding for students from underrepresented communities who wish to pursue careers in aviation." The room erupted in applause. Michael, genuinely shocked, looked at his father, who smiled knowingly. He'd been in on the secret. Later, as they walked across the tarmac toward their car, Michael felt a sense of closure. "You know, Dad, when that video first went viral, I hated it. I just wanted to hide from all the attention." His father nodded. "And now? Now I'm glad it happened. Not the slap itself, but everything that came after. One incident led to better working conditions for flight crews, better training, and now scholarships for kids who might not otherwise get these opportunities." Michael looked up at a plane taking off overhead. "It's like you always say, it's not about what happens to you, it's about what you do with it." As they drove away from the airport, Michael thought about Diane, who would soon be returning to work. He hoped she had found the same sense of perspective that he had. Sometimes the worst moments can lead to unexpected growth, not just for individuals, but for entire systems. The incident would always be part of Michael's story, but it was no longer the whole story. It was just the beginning of something bigger than himself. A small push toward a world where people treated each other with more understanding, even on those days when the sky seemed full of turbulence.